unless you subscribe and like. All right, hello YouTube, and welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be doing more Lord of the Rings type content. Today's video is going to be kind of a lore video on the Mines of Moria and all that. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to subscribe, like, and comment for more of this Lord of the Rings type content, please do. Also, if you guys have any ideas for videos you guys want to see us do, let us know. And I also hope you guys like the kind of new art style on the background that's on there now. But yeah, joined by Logan and Nick again. If you guys want to introduce yourselves again.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Logan. The other one is Nick.
I am
Wow.
Nick, yeah.
Wow. Great. Okay, so the Mines of Moria basically are brought about from, they're kind of the, I guess, the origin or like place of the dwarves. It's really where Durin's line of folk kind of start at, and it's where they're all buried at or whatnot. And the big thing that was about the Mines of Moria is Mithril. It was the only place that you could actually get that. And Mithril was kind of a major thing. It was incredibly strong, as we see with Frodo and Bilbo in the main story. And also, Mithril kind of gave the dwarves a way of trading with other people, as we'll talk about a little bit later. But Durin the First is the first person to kind of capitalize on this and is kind of their first king. And every king after then will be named after Durin. So it'll be Durin the First all the way to, is it Durin the Seventh, Nick?
Yes.
Durin the Seventh? Okay, so that ends up all happening, and then we see that their mithril is used in a lot of different type of things in the story, right? So we see that the mithril is actually involved in the Ring of Power that Galadriel ends up getting. Her ring is actually made with mithril. And then we also see that mithril is used for armor, used for weapons and all that stuff. So you can see why it was so valuable and it was used as a main currency. And what's really unique about the Mines of Moria was that the Mines of Moria was kind of this central hub in Middle-earth, just based upon it being in the middle. And also it united, the western side, the west of the mountains, and the eastern side, the east of the mountains. And at this time, when the dwarves had first colonized the Mines of Moria and all that, they actually did trade with the elves in Eregion. This is where kind of we see Celebrimbor and Sauron kind of create the ring. Or not create the One Ring, but all the other rings and stuff like that. And we see like all of that until their fall, and eventually you see some of the elves get away with actually the help of the Mines of Moria dwarves and all that. If anything you guys want to add to that?
Yeah, didn't the Dwarves of Moria also specifically help Elrond?
They did. So yeah, they were the main kind of reason that he was able to get out of Eregion before it was kind of destroyed by Sauron.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, they kind of also helped kind of make Rivendell at a point. So.
Oh yeah, because it was a stronghold kind of originally. Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Actually, before you do start, I was wondering about something. I heard you say that they made weapons out of mithril, but I don't remember any weapons being made out of it unless they didn't specify it.
So
are there any in the books that were made of it?
I don't know. By the time we get to the Lord of the Rings, probably not, just because mithril had stopped being used by then. And I'm not exactly sure what weapons were actually made from mithril. I'm just looking at it and it said weapons were made from it. I just don't know what ones. If there are specific ones you guys know of, or maybe this is wrong on the source, let me know.
See, I heard that instead of weapons being fully made from mithril, I kind of heard that it was more reinforced.
That could be, yeah. That might be it.
Yep. I could kind of see that, yeah, with the faux hammer and the goblin cleaver, since they kept such pristine condition, being stuck in a troll cave. They did very well.
Yeah, that very well could be.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, think of it like a kind of like a fantasy version of steel. Like steel's like iron with extra carbon, mixed in. Maybe it's maybe they did a special blend of steel with mithril or something. Who knows?
That could be it. Yeah.
Now, the next thing I would probably want to talk about is how the Mines of Moria and the dwarves that lived there and Durin's folk were actually a very pivotal part against Sauron. They actually participated in the Last Alliance. I'm not sure how much they ended up doing, if it was just kind of supporting them with, supporting through arms and stuff like that and making them armor and stuff like that and supporting their war efforts there. If they were actually in the battles, I would assume they would be. I don't know if it's clarified. I'm not seeing any information here that would say that, but they all were involved with that. And we also know that the dwarves ended up helping like secure their borders a lot. So when there were like attacks from orcs or goblins, they would help kind of the surrounding people that were there. So you had men on kind of the eastern side, and then you would have the elves on the western side. And that was kind of how the second age kind of went. The third age is kind of where the Mines of Moria takes kind of a darker stage, because the problem with the mithril was that not only did it ends up running out in the third age, it also is that they are actually given one of the rings of power from Sauron, right? They get one of the dwarven rings, and we know this kind of makes the dwarves mine more and more kind of greedy and stuff like that. And when you have the idea of they're desperate for getting more mithril, because again, it's their main source of currency basically, and also with the added effects of the rings of power, it kind of delves them to dig too deep, and they awake a Balrog from the age of kind of Morgoth and all that stuff. And this Balrog had been asleep since his kind of master had been defeated and all that.
Yeah, I mean, you're pretty spot on there. And the Balrog itself kills Durin. Is it
The sixth.
which the sixth? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's why he gets the name Durin's Bane.
That is correct.
Yes, yes.
And the Balrog also does slay his son Nain, I'm going to assume that's how you say it. And he ended up trying to take charge of the dwarves and trying to defend it, but eventually they get kind of pushed out and all that. And after they are pushed out, this is when we kind of see the orcs kind of take over and all that stuff, and we see mainly Azog leading the not the dwarves, the orcs that take over the Mines of Moria, and he's kind of quote unquote the king under the mountain, I guess. And for a while, this is kind of what happens, right? Where the Balrog is just kind of, he's in the Mines of Moria, but he's kind of letting the orcs live there, right? The Balrog's the main kind of force of the Mines of Moria, while as the think about the orcs as kind of like a parasite where they're just kind of allowed to live there almost. And that's kind of for a while all that really happens there, until we get to the events of the Hobbit, where the Lonely Mountain is restored. And because of, I think, the faith of the dwarves of being able to retake it from Smaug and all that stuff, this kind of leads to Balin thinking that he could take, the Mines of Moria back and take it back. And also at this point, it had been many years since we'd heard anything of the Balrog. And also, there was kind of a battle there in which the orcs and the dwarves had fought in trying to reclaim it the first time. And this was kind of where we see Azog fighting against Thrar. And I hope I said that right. I always struggle with that name. But they end up fighting, and the dwarves end up winning it. But it's one of those things where it's a battle in which they lost a lot of dwarves, to where there was no really chance they were going to be able to defeat the Balrog. But what the point of this, what I'm trying to say, is that for a lot of the dwarves probably looking from the outside after this battle, they probably think a lot of the orcs have probably died off and or been killed off, and there's a lot less in there, to that they should be able to retake it pretty easily. And that's kind of what leads to Balin leading his expedition into the Mines of Moria. The expedition, more or less, is Balin, and he leads, I think it's Ori and Nori, maybe? I always forget the other two dwarves he leaves in there, but it's two from Thorin's company or whatnot. And they go in from the east gate, and for the most part, they're very successful. They drive out any of the orcs or goblins that make themselves aware. And for the first couple years, there's actually a lot of peace, right? Balin is sending notes to, King Dane and Erebor. And for a while there, it seems like things are going well. Like they're reclaiming a lot of the halls and stuff and reclaiming the eastern side of Moria. Now, the problem is when they start to get to the more western parts of Moria. And this is where a lot of the, orcs start to make their appearance again, and we also see the orcs come back through the eastern gate, as well as the Balrog kind of coming back into fruition and trying to help kick out the dwarves. So we kind of see in the last 2 years how slowly the dwarves keep losing more ground, and they keep losing more of Moria. And the other thing that makes it even worse, right, is that at the time where kind of Balin dies and all that stuff, The West Gate is pretty much, they can't, if they even get to it, which some of them actually do, the Watcher in the Water that we see in the Lord of the Rings, like the books, is still there and actually is blocking that exit, so they can't get out that way. The only other way they can get out is if they go through the eastern way, but this is kind of where the orcs and goblins are coming back into Moria and kind of trapping them in. And that's kind of where we get the whole sentiment of we're trapped and we can't get out that we see in the book that Gandalf ends up reading in the main story. And eventually they just get overrun and or killed. And what's very interesting about this is that we really don't actually know, or I guess most of the characters or the people in Middle-earth don't really know what happens after this point. A lot of people did not know if Balin was still in the Mines of Moria and just had gone silent or what was going on there, right? And we see that in the book, something I wish the movies would have done a bit better because it helps build the lore of the Mines of Moria, is that Glowin, this is Gimli's father. He himself is unsure of what actually happened in the Mines of Moria. He actually ends up going to Rivendell for that reason. And then another reason of the Mouth of Sauron goes to Erebor and says, if you give us the information for Bilbo and the Shire and all that stuff, we'll give you, I think, 2 of the Rings of Power back. One of them being one of them was, I think, the one in Moria. And then also helping them reclaim Moria and giving them Moria. So that is kind of the big reason we see Glowin and Gimli even at the Council of Rivendell and all that. And anything else you guys want to talk about before we get into the main story?
I would like to talk about the Watcher of the Waters outside the exit of Moria. Because I'm not sure, just to clarify, was the Watcher of the Waters put there by Morgoth, or is it more of a third party kind of creature that just happens to be there?
I think it's not from Morgoth. I think it's something that was deep, under the mountain and stuff like that. We're not actually given the complete lore of it, but I believe it was something that was just kind of lurking deep within, kind of, I guess, the earth or whatever. And it just kind of gets awakened by, I guess, all of these evil forces kind of reappearing again, like the Balrog, like Sauron taking power and all that stuff. So I think that's why it kind of comes back into play.
Makes sense.
I'm not 100% sure on that, so if I'm wrong, let us know in the comments, but not completely sure on that one. All right, so getting into the normal story. So the normal story I started to kind of talk about and why Balin and Glowin end up going there. But for most of the world, right, this was a big change from kind of the Second Age, where the Second Age, the Mines of Moria was definitely used as, 1, a trading place, and 2, the biggest one, is getting on the other side of the mountains. We see not only in the Fellowship of the Ring or, the Hobbit, we see all of these situations where it's so difficult and very dangerous to try and go, over the mountains or through the mountains. And if you're kind of not going through the Gap of Rohan or that area, it's actually very difficult to get across. And we see how desperate the Fellowship of the Ring people get when they have to go through the Mines of Moria, right? Because it's something very unknown. We don't know really what happened. Even Gimli, where Gimli in the movies, they made him kind of act like he had no idea that, and he thought Balin was there. In the books, so he actually questions it a little bit more because he's not exactly sure what they're going to meet in there, and all of that. And Mines of Moria, just in general, at this point of the story, even without knowing what happened with Balin, was actually a very dangerous area just based upon countless conflicts with orcs and goblins in the area, even when the dwarves were in Moria. But that all happens, and then the other big problem that you have is that the Balrog not only is going to instantly know that the company is going into the Mines of Moria based upon 2 things. You have the Ring of Power, a really big source of evil power, more or less, and also Gandalf being, there as well, and having his as a big power of kind of not of Middle-earth, how the Balrog is as well. It's kind of basically like a beacon to the Balrog. And I don't even think, we like to clown on Pippin, for bringing attention to the Fellowship, but I think regardless, the Balrog was going to find them regardless, just based upon who had been brought into the mines and what they had brought in as well. But what ends up happening is, they go through, and then you have this battle with, Durin's Bane versus Gandalf, and they end up duking it out for a while, and eventually Durin's Bane is actually killed. So that kind of all happens, and the Fellowship kind of goes out, and they get out of the mines. What's actually interesting is that in the books, it's a little bit different than the movies. The books, the actual Mines of Moria goblins and orcs or whatever, actually end up like following the Fellowship into Lorien, and then as well meeting up with the Orci company that take Pippin and Merry. So it's actually very interesting that in why we also see some of the depleting of numbers of the goblins in Moria, and why the dwarves are maybe able to retake it so much easier after the end of the Third Age and all that stuff, is because we see all these goblins dying, right? We see the Lorien archers kind of taking out a lot of them, and then later on the Rohirrim will end up kind of finishing them off as well. And that's kind of all we hear about from Moria for actually quite a bit. There's no one else that really goes there until a little bit later after the War of the Ring, when we have Durin the Seventh end up going back, and then they go to kind of retake it, and they end up doing that. And that is kind of the whole idea, where the dwarves live out there, and eventually they kind of fade into, nothing. They kind of die out or whatever, and it becomes kind of the Age of Men. Anything you guys would like to add before we wrap this one up about the Mines of Moria?
Not that I can think of. I think you hit it right on the head there.
Yeah.
All right.
I do got a question. I was sitting here thinking about it. When you said they all went back to Moria and they kind of went extinct, did all the dwarves go there, or do you think there might have been like a subgroup that might have stayed up in like the Iron Hills or
yeah,
in
there's probably I'm not actually 100% sure, but I would assume there would have been some that stayed in Erebor and stuff like that. But yeah, there are a large portion that end up going back to Moria, because it is described as the greatest kingdom of the dwarves. And I think probably a bulk majority of them end up going there and then kind of dying out. More or less.
Yeah, because there's also dwarves to the east too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there are some over there too. I was just kind of curious. I wonder how long the subgroups of dwarves would have lasted. They kind of like just stayed separate from everyone else in the world.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
That's a good question.
Well, thank you guys all for watching. If you'd like to see us do something else, let us know. And we will see you guys next Saturday with another video. And I'm not sure what it's going to be yet, but it'll be something else. So, bye, guys.